We're now being joined by Adesuwa Amara for update on COVID-19 pandemic. Adesuwa, great to have you. It's a pleasure talking to you this morning.
Good morning. Good to be here, Rufai.
Morning, yeah.
And good morning, Tundun. Good morning, Dr. Bati. Morning. And globally, during the week of 21st through the 27th of February, the number of COVID-19 cases as well as deaths continue to decline by 16% and 10% respectively, and that's according to the weekly epidemiological report by the WHO. If we have those figures by the Johns Hopkins University tally globally, they paint a picture of where we've been moving from since the first case emerged from Wuhan in China. Well, this decline was seen in most regions of the WHO. However, the Western Pacific was the only region to see an increase in cases. There was a 32% increase in the number of new infections in that WHO region for the last 7 days. Western Pacific region as well as the Eastern Mediterranean were also the only two to see an increase in deaths. In the other four regions of the world categorized by the WHO, including here in Africa, there was a decline in deaths and decline in infections. Well, to Nigeria, where Rivers State and the Federal Capital Territory, Abuja, were responsible for the 8 new infections in the past 24 hours. Nigeria has not recorded any COVID-19 related deaths in the past 6 days. Well, and as the country marked 1 year since the first shipment of COVID-19 vaccines. It's been 1 year since we received our very first batch of the life-saving COVID-19 vaccines through the COVAX facility. Well, as we're marking that, we received more life-saving vaccines from the Japanese government. They were received by the NPHCDA, and we're told that this were 859,600 doses of the AstraZeneca. Well, the NPHCDA says so far in the past 1 year, we have received over 67 million doses of the COVID-19 vaccines. And out of this 67 million, 2.1 million doses are from the Johnson & Johnson vaccine that the government purchased or procured. You recall that we are not relying solely on those donations. We also purchased some J&J vaccines, and we are collecting them on a needs basis. So far we've collected 2.1 million doses of the Johnson & Johnson vaccines that were bought as a country. Away from Nigeria, the World Health Organization says as the war or the invasion of Ukraine rages on in its 8th day, there would be initially, the World Health Organization says it doesn't see any immediate impact on the vaccine supply to Africa due to the fighting there. And that's because the Russia Sputnik vaccine has been shipped to some African countries to close the gap of vaccine inequity. But the WHO says no cause for alarm just yet. Meanwhile, the WHO also recommended the anti-COVID pill made by Merck to be given to those who have mild symptoms but are at high risk of hospitalization, such as older people or those who are unvaccinated. The pill, as you know, is called Monoprovir and is developed by the U.S. company or U.S. pharmaceutical firm Merck. And finally, the WHO says that in the past 2 years, we've seen the COVID-19 take a toll on mental health, and it says there are increased cases of anxiety and depression, and this went up by 25% globally, and that's a huge number, guys. Back to you.
All right, Adesuwa, thank you so much. But I think we missed something yesterday. Yesterday makes it exactly 1 year since the AstraZeneca vaccines came into town. 1 year. The big question is, how well have we fared?
Since Nigeria received our first shipment.
Since Nigeria received our first shipment. 1 year.
Yeah, that's what I said.
Yeah.
That's what I said.
So how well have we fared since that time? What has been the vaccine uptake? What has been the reaction? It's not that we lack vaccines. In fact, we have a lot of vaccines, but people are not just taking these vaccines into their arms. Give or take, there have been some projections that if we're going to do well at all, we're going to get 40% vaccine uptake, probably we might not get 70%. And these are empirical stats by those that crunch the numbers. But are we even up to 10% as regards vaccine uptake today? No is the answer. So
No.
it just shows that if we have another outbreak, Nigeria is as vulnerable as it was probably on the 28th of February, the year 2020, when we had that index Italian case come into Nigeria. These are questions we should ask ourselves. Are we serious or are we joking as always? I rest my case.
Well, very quickly, let's start with WHO, the two concerns raised by WHO. I think nobody should be surprised that the WHO is saying that the war in Ukraine is not likely to affect the situation in terms of vaccine supply in Africa. Sputnik 5, you recall, the volume of it that is in African countries is really very small. And that's what the WHO is saying. Many African countries have taken to Pfizer, AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson. You only have a few isolated countries like Morocco and Algeria who have partnerships with, Russia in terms of Sputnik 5. But those same countries, also have other efforts with regard to the more dominant, COVID vaccines. So what the WHO is telling us is not an issue. However, the statistics are very clear. Only about 13% of the African population, 54 million, thereabouts, or is it the countries that are 54, have taken, 54 countries. Only about 13% of the population in those countries have taken the vaccine. And Africa, in terms of average, is far below other countries. In Europe, the average is about 64%. And in Africa, only about just 8 countries have done up to 10% of full immunization. So Africa is still far behind. So the challenges remain, in spite of the WHO saying, despite the war in Ukraine, African countries may not be really affected. Because Sputnik 5, in any case, is not the dominant vaccine, even if about 200 countries have been given donations, and they are part of that Russian vaccine diplomacy or Chinese vaccine diplomacy. Now, as for WHO says, it recommends the Molnupiravir, that's the exact name. Now, that recommendation is for persons who do not have severe disease. It's for persons who have not been affected by the Omicron variant. So in other words, it's limited in terms of the report that has been published in the British Medical Journal and the research that the experts have carried out in over 2,000 patients. So, but there is also Paxlovid, which is the other alternative.
Pfizer.
Yeah, by Pfizer, BioNTech. Now, Paxlovid is said to be about 90% effective. Now, Molnupiravir is said to be just about 34% effective. So the thing to note is that, the WHO is also considering recommending the Paxlovid. In December, Molnupiravir through, is it Merck? Yeah, was presented for approval by the FDA in the United States, and he got that approval. Before it, the Pfizer people got approval for Paxlovid. But however, the importance of all of this is that science is moving forward. Efforts are being made to see how hospitalization can be reduced, how severe disease can be addressed, and even in the case of this Molnupiravir that has been given approval, is for a certain age category, persons, above 50. Meanwhile, in another news, the White House, through President Biden, is proposing a new plan for addressing the challenge of COVID-19. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention has already said, well, the mask mandate may not be compulsory in the White House and also at the Pentagon.
But at the same time, the authorities in the United States are saying, we can't give up. We need to invest more. And there's a proposal before Congress by President Biden asking for more investment in treatment, in testing, even if the mask mandate is been relaxed. And the relaxation of that mask mandate, yes, we're told, is in line with the fact that America is now ahead in terms of testing and treatment. But the truth also is that there was a Supreme Court judgment, that challenged the presidential, rule on COVID-19 mask mandates.
Right. I read something a day, so I'd like you to address. I mean, this gentleman wrote an article talking about how since Russia invaded Ukraine, nobody's talking about COVID-19. Isn't that funny? Sort of trying to add fuel to that fire that the whole COVID-19 pandemic was a hoax, which of course will in turn affect anti-vaxxers and what have you. What's your take on this? Because, people write these things and they really feel like they said something.
Yes, it seems like the perfect narrative for anti-vaxxers to run along with Tundu. But in the real sense of it, with countries not asking for or easing COVID protocols just because of this situation in Ukraine, it makes perfect sense to allow for humanitarian needs to be attended to first. And that scientists had already said that we're likely to see an upsurge in these cases because nobody is really caring about COVID. It doesn't mean that COVID is gone. It doesn't mean that there is no COVID. It just means that we have changed priority from COVID at the moment to lives. People are being bombed and killed in Ukraine as that invasion goes on. And so neighboring countries such as Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, who had planned to ease their COVID protocols sometime later, had to do that early to allow for these refugees to come in. And of course, with the evacuation happening across the world, people just want to get back their citizens safe and sound first before they think of any other thing. I think that's what has happened here. It's not a case that it's not a case of COVID disappearing or COVID, leaving us just yet. We might likely see an upsurge in cases, and we do hope that with this upsurge there will be no more virulent variant, because if you see Hong Kong, what's happening in Hong Kong and some Asian countries, you would know that COVID is still very much with us as they record daily numbers of infections, and deaths as well.
And this one, that article was filled with a lot of anti-vaxxer rubbish. And let's set the record straight. The mask mandate was already relaxed in the UK before the war started. The mask mandate was already relaxed in the UK before the war started. And there was no need for a COVID test to come into the UK from the 11th of February. And that was way before the war started. So people should stop bandying this rubbish they put all around in that article.
Anyway, thank you very much.
Yes, indeed.
We need to take a short break now.
Okay. We'll see.
You were going to say something. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, okay, thank you, Dr. Batsy. The UK was easing some measures, but not all of its measures. For some people who were not vaccinated, there were still measures in place to self-isolate, even though they had dropped their mask mandates and their testing rules. And the testing rules were not dropped for everybody. So these rules apply to different category of people in different places.
Okay, thank you so much.
Welcome back to the Morning Show here on Arise News. For Global Business Update, Michael Wilson joins us now from South Africa. Good morning, Mr. Wilson.
Good morning. As you can imagine, most of the markets have been, as far as Asia Pacific is concerned, conspicuously on edge, basically following every development. It's very, very difficult to get detail right now of what's been going on as far as the world's concerned. As far as the markets are concerned, Nikkei down about 2.5%, Hang Seng about the same. Mainland China, Shanghai stopped doing similar kind of falls as well. South Korea down. Two major indexes basically in Asia Pacific just extended losses after they'd seen that smoke was visible from that nuclear plant in Ukraine. We've since heard that it's not quite as serious as people had actually thought. I'm going to take you to China now, and as I'm going to outline this as well as US and European businesses are distancing themselves from Russian businesses. China's tech companies have been quite quiet about this. Alibaba, Xiaomi and Huawei have actually, after media requests, have said nothing about what they're doing, and the Chinese still are not talking about an invasion of Ukraine. They're remarkably quiet about all this. Where that's going to lead, I don't know, but it's geopolitical forces taking place right now. Let's turn our attention just away from Ukraine just for a second to Sri Lanka, which is its economic crisis is continuing, rising prices, high debt and so on. The usual problems there. Daily life has become a bit of a struggle for Sri Lanka. We should continue to monitor that, even though most of the attention is on Ukraine. Global businesses so far have banned Russia, like Apple and so on. RT News and Sputnik has been taken from Google's App Store and all the way around the world. And also Google has removed both those new websites, Play Store and also its online app store. H&M reported yesterday, second largest retailer in the world, stock Nike, Disney, Warner Brothers, the list actually continues, and Visa and MasterCard, quite importantly, are not blocking payments for that kind of business. The Russian ruble is continuing to collapse, and shares of one of the country's biggest lenders, Cyberbank, we told you about this yesterday, down once again this morning to practically zero. A good friend of mine called Daniel Yergin, I interviewed him many years ago when he introduced a really seminal book on the oil industry. He's now working for IHS Markit, which is a global consultancy firm, and he's saying that the world is on the edge of or could be on the edge of an energy crisis if sanctions by the US and all the others actually extend to oil and energy, which they have not quite done so far, but I expect they probably will. As far as US stocks are concerned, big falls, as you can imagine, yesterday in stock futures down today. But the big figures, we had some employment figures yesterday from the United States, which were quite reasonable. We've got the big ones today, US farm payrolls. Normally, the markets will be transfixed by those, but, because of what's going on in Ukraine, they're not. But it will nudge the Federal Reserve as to whether we're going to hear about interest rates rising next week. I suspect we are. How much? Not quite sure. Elon Musk in the United States has dared the union to hold a vote at this Tesla factory. It's not the first time he's actually challenged unions to take a stand. He did it in 2018 when he wrongfully, according to the union, sacked a union organizer. But that will continue as well. That's a sort of industrial debate going on at his car production firm. The EU is saying that it's ready if Russia decides to weaponize its gas supplies, i.e. cut off. What they're actually going to do, not quite sure, but they're saying that they're prepared for that. UK has sanctioned two more oligarchs, Alisher Usmanov and Igor Shuvalov, both of those with ties to soccer in the country and also commercial companies as well. And finally, commodity markets, well, into record territory, unfortunately, for another week. Don't need to tell you about oil prices, but it's affecting everything from oil to grain and so on. And what's actually quite interesting is that Ukraine's raised more than $54 million in Bitcoin donations, because obviously their central bank isn't working at the moment. So Bitcoins are actually helping the struggle for those. And it's received 102,000 crypto asset donations so far. So people are clearly, and they've come in the form mainly of cryptocurrencies. So that's helping the UK people struggle against Russia. That's the global view this morning as we go to the weekend.
All right, thank you so much, Michael. Inflation has started to bite hard. In fact, there are supplies not getting into France any longer. Ukraine produces one of the largest amounts of sunflower oil that is used to make chips in some parts of Europe. Suppliers are beginning to complain that they can't get sunflower oil. How is this very illiberal world going to deal with the offshoots of the crisis in Ukraine? And I use that word deliberately, liberal, Because Francis Fukuyama had an op-ed recently and says the world is fast becoming illiberal and not the world for liberalism any longer. Secondly, I want to talk about what is happening in China. Nothing has been heard about Evergrande or all the property crashes in China any longer. Is it that the Chinese government is doing something they're not telling us or hiding something for us? Is something happening in China that is deeper than what we see on the surface? Because China has gone mute, and I know something is up.
Well, we haven't heard about Evergrande for a very long time, have we? I think the last time that you and I spoke about it, we sort of agreed that what was probably going on was a managed kind of decline of the company behind the scenes involving a lot of government money. They're not telling us, because they're not telling us in the same way that, as I said to you earlier in my report, they've gone very silent, certainly the tech companies, about whether or not they're going to withdraw business from Russia. I think it's quite important, though, to measure what companies are actually doing. Some of them, as I quoted to you, are suspending operations with Russia. Very few of them are saying that they're never going to deal with it again. And it's also quite instructive to work out how much of their businesses actually depend on Russia, as we were talking about yesterday. Some of them, like H&M, for example, although it's big for them to say this, it's not a huge amount of their turnover. And it's like other companies as well. I think when push comes to shove, when we see energy markets refusing, although I did tell you yesterday, I think that 70% of Russian oil supplies are now waiting for buyers. But that said, oil markets, as you quite rightly say, to address your first point, are extremely leaky indeed. And I think that all the fears of inflation may or may not happen. We saw those big figures in Europe yesterday, but all these things really are some very, very small concern. What we don't want to see, and again we spoke about this yesterday, is a return to stagflation, where we see central banks piling on the pressure to reduce interest, to reduce inflation and strangling growth. We don't want to see that. And I was listening to the central bank governor of Lithuania this morning, and he was saying that actually, to be perfectly honest, there's very little that central government banks can actually do. All they can do to reduce inflation is to add to the unemployed, and they're never going to own up to that. So I think these are very, very difficult times. It's very difficult to draw any conclusions from what's going on right now. I think we've got to see how this first phase of the war, we're only a week into it, actually transpired before we can make judgments about this. But all your worries are of course correct.
Well, Michael, quickly. The World Bank boss, David Malpass, is saying that what is happening in Ukraine represents an economic catastrophe for the entire world. How much of a catastrophe is it? And then secondly, the Ukrainians are saying, they will sell non-fungible tokens to get money. The Bretton Woods institutions are saying they will make money available to Ukraine. Was Ukraine really prepared for this conflict? Because it looks like the Russians are better prepared.
I think that I can't tell you what's happening in Ukraine at the moment, nor can anybody else, because we're not seeing an overall picture of what's going on, because that's the nature of war reporting. You're a bit there and a bit from here, and we draw our conclusions about it. One thing that Ukraine is winning, as far as the social media war, there's no question about that. I told you earlier in the week about this curious thing where women were going up to captured Russian soldiers and saying, "Would you like to ring your mother in Russia and tell her that you're okay and she can come and pick you up?" I mean, these are the kind of things that people are looking towards. So Ukraine may not have been prepared for this all-out war, this 40-mile-long column of troops and so on. But certainly, as far as media relations are concerned, social media relations are concerned, it's doing very well indeed. Again, it's very difficult to say what's actually happening there, because we simply don't know. All we can do is measure the volatility of the markets and see which way they're going. And it could all change over the weekend. It could, by the time we're talking on Monday morning, things will have changed rapidly then. It's very, very difficult to say at the moment.
Well, I do hope it all changes rapidly. I wanted to talk about the environmental implications now that Europe is trying to wean themselves off that dependence on Russian gas. And it's interesting to me that coal is suddenly back on the front burner, as polluting as it is. I recall our last finance minister in Nigeria trying and failing to get funding for Nigeria's coal industry because it just wasn't politic at the time. the whole world was talking about reining in greenhouse gas emissions, and all of a sudden that's just been thrown out the window. What's your take on coal?
Yeah, it has. I mean, yesterday we saw Australia, didn't we, saying that it would like to supply Poland with coal because that's what Poland uses to generate electricity, but it didn't feel as though it had sufficient resources simply for exactly the reasons you've just said, because the shift before all this had been away from those kind of fossil heavy fuels, and things are changing. I think that we have actually discussed this in the past, not because we knew about Ukraine and Russia, but because we knew that the transition period would be very, very difficult indeed. It's all right campaigners saying, or governments saying, we're all going to be carbon neutral by such and such a date, whether it be 2030, 2050 and so on. But it doesn't really take into account the realities of it, which are, like a lot of countries, still rely upon coal to fuel their electricity. And you're absolutely right, there will be a shift here. I don't know what the EU's planning, but I mean, it's quite interesting to say that they will move away from their reliance on Russia gas. I think it would be very difficult for them. Interested to see what they have to say, and again, all will be revealed presumably in the next few weeks. But you're absolutely right; it's a delicate balancing act. But we're still, never mind the war, would still be in this kind of transition stage for many years. It's the way of the world, unfortunately.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Wilson. Have a good weekend. Now, our dependable Rota Sadiri is here to give us an African business update. Good morning, Roses.
Good morning, Tundu. Good morning, Rufai. Good morning, Doctor. Good morning to all our viewers. We begin with some big news today with respect to the Nnpc taking an interest in the Mobil producing Nigeria Unlimited subsidiary of Exxon Mobil. Remember, we talked about this last week. Seplat put out a press release. It was a corporate acquisition of the shares of MPNU to the tune of $1.2 billion. Now, that was the announcement. There was still, of course, regulatory movements that had to take place, as well as the regulator approving the deal. But now Nnpc, and you remember, Nnpc has, as a majority shareholder in its joint venture agreement with the oil majors, it has a right of first refusal. And when that comes to, asset transfers and so on. So they are exercising that right. They have sent a letter to the NUPRC, that's the Nigeria Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission. They've sent a letter to Seplat, also sent a letter to Exxon Mobil. And there is a meeting that is actually going to be taking place on the 17th of this month with Seplat, with Exxon, over this matter. Now, of course, the issue here is that, yes, Nnpc, majority shareholder in these joint venture agreements, they have a right of first refusal, but that's for asset transfers. This is a corporate acquisition of shares of the MPNU. So does that count in this case? So that's what is going to be discussed later on this month. So it's going to be very interesting to see how things turn out, because, of course, we thought, that things have been going to be moving along with Exxon, with Seplat taking over those assets. So we'll see how things transpire after the 17th, when that meeting is concluded. We move to power. The Power Minister Abubakar Aliyu, he had a press briefing yesterday where he said that the amount of power that Nigeria delivers is a lot more than what's been reported. Let's take a look at the page 1 of his press briefing that he put out. He essentially says that, okay, so this is the front page. Honorable Minister of Power's press briefing, March the 3rd. Then the outline: Nigeria electricity supply, grid intervention, service-based tariffs, discos, national mass metering, so on and so forth. Here's page 2, the second page, the key here. He says that, if you look that right there, the Nigeria electricity supply industry consists of grid power, embedded power, and captive industrial power. It's important for Nigerians to understand that all of this power is governed under NERC, the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission. Despite the constant communication of 4,000 megawatts of power, the actual figures are as follows. He says it's 8,000 megawatts that's delivered daily, not 4,000. And then we have an installed capacity of almost 18,000 megawatts, not 13,000. Now, he says there, these are not my figures. This was an industry study conducted by KPMG. So, of course, I went to the report from KPMG. So here's the first page. This is back on Q1 2021. KPMG put out a study, Nigeria's electricity supply industry highlights. Now, here's what he's talking about. If you look at the second page, what's been highlighted here? KPMG attributed this to the Association of Power Generation Companies. They said, and it's highlighted that the Association of Power although the headline there at the top says increase in power generation by 93%. KPMG says the Association of Power Generation Companies, the APGC, reports that the available generation capacity of 4,200 megawatts has increased by 93% to 8,000. But it's what they're saying, so it's not, that we have to make that clear. However, you can see underneath that, due to system constraints, generated power is rejected or forced to be reduced. So just to clarify, and then of course, if you ask the average Nigerian how much power you're getting, there have been so many issues with not only fuel supply, load shedding. There've been blackouts, but do you feel, are we getting 8,000 megawatts? That's if individuals can decide that. To telecommunications, there's been a sexual harassment accusation that's been leveled at the chief of sale and distribution officer for MTN Nigeria, and he's apparently resigned. Authoritative sources have actually confirmed that he has indeed resigned from the company. There were claims that were made from individuals that worked with him. An investigation was carried out by the company, and he's now resigned. So a statement is expected later on today, I believe, from MTN Nigeria, where they'll be addressing this issue. Also, still on MTN, they are giving out free calls to Ukraine for Nigerians who have loved ones, relatives that are in Ukraine that are trying to get through to them. You saw your interview earlier on, the coverage of the the Nigerians that have been evacuated here. For those that are still there, they are going to be giving free calls and text messages to loved ones that are in the Ukraine in order for them to be able to reach out to them and to be able to communicate with them. And then finally, from telcos to entertainment, the Nigerian cinemas are bracing for The Batman, which is coming out today. Yeah. It's been almost 2 months, a little over 2 months since the last week in December when Spider-Man No Way Home came out. That was the last blockbuster that came out. So far, that movie has made about 748 million naira at the Nigerian box office. So they are hoping that this will bring in money for them, because you need big blockbusters to come out. There have been a number of Nollywood movies that have come out since that time, but you need more frequent blockbusters coming out. So they'll be hoping that they make some money for them.
I can't wait. I'm a huge Batman fan. Batman and Robin.
I'm in the theater.
And I can't wait. But there was an advanced screening yesterday, actually.
I heard that. I tried to confirm. Did it happen here?
So it started
in Nigeria.
Oh yeah.
I tried to confirm.
If you check the cinema, you'll see there was an advanced screening.
I missed it.
I saw it on the website.
I was working.
But real quickly, I'm happy the way we called out the minister.
Minister of Power.
Minister of Power.
Yeah.
What is all of this? What's going on?
Well, we
don't churn out 8,000. Let's not deceive ourselves. And look at what KPMG quoted there.
Yeah.
It's not an independent body that independently verifies. So let's get the facts right. I mean,
it's very
we don't want to use the L word, but it's good you called them out.
Yeah.
And you see this normal excuse we always give, that it's because of water shortage at Kaiji Dam, and that's why we're not getting enough power and the likes. That excuse is lame. We've been giving that excuse since God knows when. All right, and we flare gas so much. We can't use gas and harness our gas for power production. We've got coal in Enugu. I don't see why we shouldn't even use coal to produce power. I don't know why we
fuel, right? It's dirty.
Dirty fuel when you don't have it?
No, that is the response.
What are you telling China and India are still using coal?
Right.
Most of their power plants in China, Poland, even in America,
Poland needs it right now.
Over 15% of their power is still from coal.
South Africa as well.
South Africa coal. You're saying you can't use coal for what?
Dirty
you don't
fuel.
even have anything. You're saying dirty what?
The environment.
And that's the way you see we went to sign that thing in 2017. I'm like, oh, here we go again.
Climate change.
Okay, Rotus, first, I don't know what our interest is in the MTN story. I don't know why it should be important to us.
Well, it's important, Doctor, because it was an accusation that was leveled
I'm going to interrogate it.
Okay.
You just hold on.
Okay.
This is a company matter. There is a gentleman and another lady called Aminata who have been accused of underhand dealings, conflict of interest. The conflict of interest part of it, I guess, is probably more important. Persons working, because I read the details of that story. It's all about whistleblowers saying this is an issue we have in our company. These two persons, they are doing all kinds of shady dealings. I think it's more of the responsibility of the MTN to look into it and to take a decision.
Right, that's what I said. They investigated it.
And I didn't see in the story a decision taken yet by MTN.
Right, but I'm
And
confirming to you that he has resigned. That's what
Yeah,
I'm
I read
right.
that. He resigned on its own.
So I'm sorry.
No, can I finish?
Okay, go right ahead.
You spent so much time.
Go right ahead. I just want to make sure we're clear on what I'm reporting.
No, I know
here.
what
Okay.
I'm talking about.
All
I
right.
read the story. So don't try to gag.
No, doctor, you keep saying you read a story. I'm confirming what I got from the company.
Saying the details are in the same story you read.
No,
and I'm
it's
saying
not his resignation. That's just
he
to be clear.
resigned. That's part of the story. Okay?
That's not in the story,
That much
doctor.
is very clear. There are two stories out there.
Okay.
One is in the Star, the other one is in another publication. You just hold on.
Go right ahead.
Now, so what I'm saying is that, look, while you may say from a public side of it, you may be concerned about allegations of sexual harassment. There was an allegation of sexual harassment, which the company has not yet investigated. There is also the allegation about, conflict of interest, certain persons within the company trying to, play smart and all that. And I think that MTN has the responsibility, based on its own rules, based on its own values, to investigate this. We, sitting here, which is my point, we're not in a position, because we're not privy to the full details, to take a decision and say, oh, Adebi is guilty, or Ms. Aminata is guilty. So when MTN does that, every company has the right to insist on the fiduciary responsibilities of its staff. So what I don't want is a situation whereby we engage in trial by media on the basis of reports, on one blog or the other blog. That's my position on that. As for the Minister of, what is it again? Power, Aliyu. Now, he's just lying. And people should not use their position as ministers of the public, of the Federal Republic, to lie to the people of Nigeria. He's talking about problem with water, hydro problems. This is a perennial excuse that we hear all the time. Anytime it's the dry season, it's, water level has gone down in Kanjen Dam. Everybody says that. That's an unintelligent thing to say. Because the whole idea of the electricity sector reform is to see how we can move beyond that. What we should be looking at is, why have we not moved beyond that? That's the first point. He complains about right-of-way issues. 330 kilometers, right-of-way issues between Ibadan and Osogbo, between Kaduna and Katsina, and in one other part of the country. Well, this is supposed to be one government that is in the majority. So I think it's most strange that even an APC ruling government is not able to solve that problem. Ikorekmene to Ikorabasi. Maybe it goes all the way to Ikoransa, wherever. Okay? So it's not for the minister to come before a media briefing at the State House and just be wringing his hands in complete helplessness. The other issue that you talk about is metering gaps. And he went before the journalists at the State House and he said, oh, the metering gap that we are having, we are blaming the discos because the discos are collecting money for giving out meters. Meters are supposed to be free. Now, is he just discovering that? So the question to ask is, what have the relevant authorities done about making sure that that metering program, which is a major priority for the Buhari administration, is not something that some people will frustrate? Then he lied about power generation. Every dunderhead in the electricity sector knows that the issue is not really the generation. It's about the grid. It's about the evacuation of power. It's about the delivery of power, along the value chain. Okay? So this is where the problem lies. And I guess this is part of the reason why the National Assembly, in considering constitutional amendments, talked about, oh, can we just decentralize this thing so that states can also get involved in this generation. But, I don't want a situation where we just sit down here and we're discussing something that does not, appear to be the truth. So the Minister of Power is in need of urgent re-education about the same ministry that he presides over.
Have you ever heard a Middle Eastern country that are as dry as arid as a desert, because they're literally in the desert, talking about how we can't generate power because we're in the dry season. Have you ever heard that? Once. Have you heard it once? Only in Nigeria. And I'm trying to remember, what's the source of the River Niger? It's called Futa something.
Futa Jalon.
Thank you. So apparently it's from Futa Jalon, and the overflow from that, which is when our dams are the most, overflowing and abundant, comes 6 months down the line, really in the dry season, not in the rainy season. But really, have you ever heard? Think about it.
It's quite
the challenge is, why don't we diversify this source of energy? There's so much talk about solar, about wind, about, what happened to innovation? What happened to the original purpose of the electricity sector reform process? But thank you very much, Rochus.
Thank you so much.
Don't worry, it looked like I harassed you a little bit this
Doctor.
Let MTN worry about their problems.
Indeed.
Okay, now, thank you.